group of game developers into a haunted office.
The building is scary as it might sound.
Apparently there's actually a ghost or something that lives here or haunts this place.
Give them a determined leader with a vision.
Jaffe's a very interesting man.
He can be a complete a**hole, quite frankly.
And you'll get a game that takes everything to the edge and beyond.
God of War is the game that I've wanted to make since I was a little kid.
It's a hardcore game. It's gross. There's blood and guts, but it's a challenge.
There's this great big high adventure, hyper-violent, overly sexual, adult action adventure game. That's kind of God of War in a nutshell.
This is a behind-the-scenes look at the making of God of War. In the era when the PlayStation 1 is king, a team of veteran game developers strike out on their own to create Sony Computer Entertainment Santa Monica.
They were building like the studio, and I'm like, oh my God, who's this quack?
Playing a key role in this newly formed company is David Jaffe, a man with very particular talents.
He can be a complete quite frankly. He says exactly what is in his head at any given moment.
So I'm like, this is my one shot, I'm just gonna go for it. I'm not cutting shit.
And that can be very, very amusing.
They've done some really crappy, low-budget fighting games. It's like, this game sucks.
He wants to see his vision carried out, and he's very particular, and he knows what he wants.
The company's new offices are every bit as unique as the people inside them.
A lot of the guys who had worked on Twisted Metal and who worked on Jet Moto really all decided to get together and open up a new studio. We started the studio with the intent to create new franchises for Sony and for PlayStation 1 at the time, and now PlayStation 2. We probably started with about 13 people, and from there we just expanded, hiring people from Los Angeles and other game development companies. I think we have probably about 60 people here in Santa Monica. We came into this building somewhere around 2000, but it used to be this kind of old train station, like back in the 20s.
The building is as scary as it might sound, a brick building in the middle of California, which is a little bit, if you need earthquakes and so forth, but it already kind of has an industrial feel to it because there's very little offices and there's exposed piping and rafters and so forth.
Some even say it's haunted.
Apparently there's actually a ghost or something that lives here or haunts this place, and I love ghosts. I love the whole concept of ghosts, and I would love to see this thing, and I've never seen it.
Yeah, there's been rumors of ghosts that walk the mezzanines at night.
It's always the guys who are like, oh, you know, I saw it out of the corner of my eye, or I saw it and you were in the bathroom, or you were home, and I'm like, damn, I just missed it.
I don't know, I haven't seen anything myself, but you never know.
Ghosts aren't enough to keep this team from making their first game.
We originally decided to make a racing game because we thought it would be relatively easy, and that was Kinetica.
It's this futuristic racing game where you're zooming around inside these tubes.
But Kinetica is only a warm-up.
At the end of Kinetica, we decided that we really needed to try and make something more ambitious.
We wanted to do something AAA, and we knew we wanted to do something third-person action game. We took like 6 months and just threw out as many ideas as we could come up with. The first idea that Dave ever came up to me, he goes, what do you think about making a Greek mythology game? I'm like, that's awesome.
So I was just like, you know, it just seemed like a really good fit. The action-adventure genre with this sort of subject matter that really hasn't been touched on all that much in video games. There have been a few games, but for the most part, and certainly for a long time, nothing has really been dealing with that subject. So I think that was when I realized those two things could fit together so nicely that it was like, dude, we gotta make this game.
The name of this new action-adventure game is God of War.
I went to the VP of production, who is a very smart man. And I said to him, I want to do God of War. And I pitched him the thing, and he just looks at me and he says, there's nothing innovative about that at all. And I was like, oh, he's going to say no, you know. But he was just like, you know, if that's what you want to do, go ahead and make that game. And I was like, I don't think there's any value to being innovative for the sake of being innovative. I just want to make something that's fun.
In 2001, the team gets a green light for God of War and sets out to prove their critics wrong. Now that God of War has a green light from Sony, David Jaffe and his development team in Santa Monica roll up their sleeves and get to work.
You go through and you read all the Greek mythology that you could get a hold of.
We did the movie watching, then a lot of book research, like, you know, most of us haven't done mythology reading since maybe 5th grade.
You really have to sort of start making the game. You meet with your programmers and tell them what you want to do, and you meet with the artists, you meet with the designers, and everybody just, at that point, start contributing to that vision.
He describes it as a mix between Gladiator and Harryhausen's Clash of the Titan type movies. He was trying to mix that old school Harryhausen look with the blood and guts and violence of Gladiator.
The main thing about Greek mythology is coming up with characters, right? And so everybody knows what Cyclopses are and Medusas are and Minotaurs, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's one of the benefits of our game is that there's already kind of a familiarity with it.
The team breathes new life into some classic creatures.
As far as tone for God of War, we're trying to tap into, I'll say, the darker recesses of what kind of goes on in the human psyche.
All right, I'm ready. Okay, performance ready?
The aspects that you don't really like to think about.
Action. Get out of my head, Rich!
We're trying to make more prevalent, brought to the surface on all the characters.
You all right? That didn't hurt, did it?
No.
If it's the centaur, what was it about the centaur that really made you afraid to be near one? What was it of those driving things? Is it the hooves? What is it that's causing you to fear all those things? Those are the aspects that we were trying to bring to the surface.
We just had to sort of come up with a good twisted look on it. And when the character artists go out and they start developing that concept, they just go crazy on it.
In the final version, he actually cuts the legs off. The pieces are kind of flying off.
If you see what Medusa looks like in our game compared to probably what she looks like in Clash of the Titans, it's completely different. Our Medusa sure looks freaking cool.
But giving mythological creatures a new look isn't their biggest challenge.
The hardest thing about coming up with the Greek mythology angle was coming up with who the main character was going to be. We probably spent, I think, a year and a half before we came up with sort of the final look of Kratos.
With Kratos, what I wanted to do is really create a character that, I mean, I'm a short guy. I'm 5'6", 5'7", something like that. I've put on 40 pounds in God of War. I am not Kratos, but inside I am.
We're gonna rally the troops! We're gonna burn this city!
I have the tenacity, I have the ferocity, I have the anger, I have the capacity for violence that this guy does. For me, it's almost like I want to make the guy that I wish I could be.
Aspects of Kratos that we really wanted to convey was the raw, brutal aggressiveness. That way, anybody that's playing the game can really tap into the most cathartic aspects of their own personality.
He's violent, brutal, he's nasty, he's vicious.
It kind of broke from some of the norms with a generic Greek soldier. What's about the tattoos? What's mystical about it? As well as this white skin. Not to mention all the scars, the wrath. All these elements kind of combined together shows just how tough this guy is.
By the gods, why would Athena send one such as you?
The cast of supporting characters reads like a who's who list of Greek mythology.
We have all of the main gods. We have Zeus and Ares and Athena, and they're all bickering like they are in the classic stories. We have these oracles all over the game.
Do not fear, Kratos. I am the Oracle of Athens.
They're very sexy and sexual. I mean, sexuality is a big part of God of War as well. There's a lot of nudity in the game. I think the biggest freedom we had was when we realized, no, we don't have to stick to the myths. We don't have to make a history lesson. It's a really exciting subject matter, but what we decided to do was almost take like the greatest hits of Greek mythology, the things that everybody knows, and let's just make a story around that. And if it doesn't totally fit with the actual ancient Greek myth, that's not as important as, is it simply entertaining?
As the characters for God of War are fleshed out, the developers at Sony Computer Entertainment Santa Monica shift their focus to the storyline.
The basic plot of God of War has you taking on the role of Kratos, who is a Spartan warrior. As the game begins, is actually in the process of committing suicide.
And Kratos cast himself from the highest mountain in all of Greece.
And as he falls, he starts having this flashback. And that's actually what the game is, where you're playing this flashback, and you get to basically see what led him to decide to take his own life. Embedded in that flashback is the story of Kratos, who is in search of Pandora's box, which is the only weapon capable of allowing a mortal to kill Ares, who is the God of War.
Now the team has a hero, a storyline, and a cast of enemies to do battle with. But what kind of game will God of War actually be.
Then you have to sit down and go, exactly, okay, this is great, your world is great, your monsters are great, but you're like, what's the mechanic? What do you do?
To bring the unique world of God of War to life, the team at Sony Computer Entertainment Santa Monica does a bit of recycling and reuses the engine from Connecticut.
Well, the first steps for me when I first heard about the project was kind of working out what we were going to do, how we were going to change the engine from being a racing game engine to being an engine for doing a third-person action game. We were working on many areas of the technology to try and allow ourselves as much freedom to make the game that we wanted as we could do.
The end result is a game engine that is capable of amazing visuals and pushes the PlayStation 2 like never before.
Everything is a fixed camera angle. And the whole idea was for one, we wanted kind of the movie cinema quality look. And also, we don't want the player to have to struggle with the camera. Like you're fighting and then all of a sudden I need a different point of view and have to adjust the camera. We just wanted you to be completely immersed into the game.
Hydra, that's my favorite level. It's like rain splashing everywhere, rain's pouring down, there's reflections, there's water pouring through. It's like all the goodies that we could possibly do in the engine, we were able to do in that one level.
The game really stands apart from a lot of what's going on out there. That's because we have a great art team, and they had the time to really push for the tools that they felt they needed to make a cutting-edge, visually appealing game.
The team also needs to ensure that the gameplay in God of War is every bit as gritty as the storyline.
The design team gets together every day and we just start throwing stuff out there. You just kind of have this wish list of all the things you would love the player to have. And then you just kind of tone that down as to make it more realistic of what you can actually make.
To design a fun game, it takes more than just one person's vision to make something fun. We did a lot of testing. Each design member would go off on their own, create something, then we all sit together, review it, and play off of each other's ideas.
They come up with a freestyle fighting engine which lets players be as creative as they want during combat and create a collection of deviously challenging puzzles.
In a lot of games these days, it's like to them a puzzle is, you know, pull a lever and a door opens, and if you can get through the door before it closes, that's a puzzle. All it is a lever that you pull. I mean, it's insane that they get away with that. So we racked our brains on the design side. It's like, let's come up with actual puzzles. The puzzles were really, really cool and creative.
The game does a really good job of mixing up various gameplay elements. One moment you might be slashing away at 8 bad guys. After that, you'll find yourself balancing on beams. Then you'll climb the netting on the mast of the ship. Fight there, but it feels totally different because you're smashing enemies, throwing them down, and things like that.
We basically came up with a fairly elaborate animation queuing system that was completely controllable by the designers.
You can actually just kind of move these things around and sort of just sculpting with time.
So they are able to string together animations and play them faster or slower or add delays in the middle of them. We also added context-sensitive moves, which is basically kind of grapple moves where you can animate 2 characters fighting together, holding each other or throwing each other.
And they just took it to this next level where you were doing these amazing combos and every move could be linked together into a different combo, and you really had this freedom to experiment.
Each enemy Kratos faces will be a unique challenge.
Kratos really lets the enemies have it in ways that you probably haven't seen in games before.
I'm personally fond of like Medusa and the Cyclops. With Medusa, things go on in the air, things go on everywhere. She's everywhere and anywhere during combat. She's much faster. With the Cyclops, combat with him is beyond the simple aspect of throwing a spear at the eye. You're going to see varying styles of gameplay that you're going to have to deal with.
He'll jump on the back of a Cyclops and give him the old blade in the head treatment.
And the variety of adversaries will be enough to whet any warrior's appetite.
With Kratos being about 7 feet tall or so, the relative size of characters in relation to Kratos, they range from Harpy, which was probably about the size of like a condor or something, 3 or so feet tall, with like a wingspan span of up to about 6 to 7 feet, ranging to the Cyclops, which is about 12 to 13 feet. Medusa in length is probably about 16 feet. But then you'll run across characters throughout the game that are close to 80, 90 feet tall. We've kind of built some of those into some of the boss fights.
As God of War nears completion, it becomes clear that this violent and gritty game isn't for the faint of heart. But the team is about to push the envelope even further.
Ready, here we go. 3, 2, 1, go!
Sweet.
SCEA's God of War is shaping up to be a visceral and violent tour de force. But blood and guts aren't the only things that will give this game a hard M rating.
Stay, Kratos. Just a bit longer.
There's actually a couple of places in the game where you can actually have sex in the game with Kratos, and it's like a little mini game. It speaks to the world, which is this animalistic side that Kratos has. He's a badass on the battlefield, he's a badass in the bedroom. I wanted that to come across.
The sexual content in the game, for me, I feel if it's part of the character development, it works. I think Kratos is a pretty hot, sexy man myself. To see him engaging in a little activity, it's to be expected, right?
When players play it, they'll be like, that's really fun and it's cool, it has no reason, but it kind of does bring the story out and develops the character. Kratos!
But really, God of War says, I am a mature game for grown-ups. I'm not going to hold anything back. It really doesn't seem to be ashamed at all of being a game for adults, and that's one of the most appealing things about it.
Let's broaden this genre a little bit. Let's basically bring games to adults. I think that Sony's like, of course, games aren't for kids. We've been saying that since PlayStation 1. Games are for everybody. They were actually quite supportive of the sex and the violence. As long as they're like, dude, you gotta have an M rating. We gotta make sure this is advertised only to adults. And it was like, yeah, of course. And after that, they were like, sure, make your game.
As God of War gets closer and closer to the finish line, the team brings in musicians to score the game.
The music went through 3 stages. I was really interested in licensing classic 70s and 80s rock. And I was like, that would be great to have this Greek mythology game set against kind of, rock and roll. And I played a game and I listened to some rock and roll in my headphones. I'm like, okay, this is really stupid. It's not working at all. So from then, it's transitioned over to more of kind of the synthy 70s, 80s kind of orchestral score. The sound guys were just like, dude, no one's gonna like that. Anybody younger than 30 is just gonna think that's so stupid and cheesy. Ultimately, we ended up going with more of a traditional orchestral score with live choirs and things like that. It's very ethereal and it's very magical, and that really works great.
And SCEA Santa Monica goes next door to Hollywood to find an Academy Award-winning actress to narrate the game.
The first choice for the narrator was always Linda Hunt. People were like, who's Linda Hunt? And I'm like, dude, she is awesome. She has this phenomenal voice.
The sky split apart, and the God of War stepped through.
And everybody heard it like, oh, she was absolutely right. I'm so grateful that she said yes.
He would murder the God of War.
The public gets their first taste of God of War at E3 in 2003.
We really worked our butts off to make that a really good demo.
So we really want to come out with a good reception.
And people were like, okay, this is kind of cool, but it didn't knock their socks off. But then with 2004 E3, man, that could not have gone any better. It is absolutely awesome. We constantly had lines to play the game. People were talking about the game. We got tons of nominations and awards. And it was just like, thank God.
After more than 3 years of hard work.
3 years and we're almost done. Light at the end of the tunnel.
What I am is tired. Tired and more tired?
SCEA Santa Monica finally finishes God of War. And for this weary team of developers, the game is worth every ounce of effort they put into it.
The Sony Santa Monica team is incredibly talented. They've really spared no expense. They've really thought through everything that needs to be done to make a game look amazing.
You put your blood, sweat, and tears, your heart and soul in this thing for over 3 years. It's just a great feeling, and we're going to make a statement.
It's a hardcore game. It's gross. There's blood and guts, but it's a challenge.
Working with Dave is an entertaining experience. He's a very driven individual. He's not always the most pleasant person to be around, but he gets the game made.
God of War is the game that I've wanted to make since I was a little kid. There's this great big high adventure, hyper-violent, overly sexual, adult action adventure. That's kind of God of War in a nutshell.